On October the 8th, 1769, the poet Thomas Gray left Keswick for Ambleside on his journey through the lakes. The description of his first sight of Grasmere from Dunmail Raise was to attract many visitors in the years that followed.
I entered Westmoreland a second time, and now began to see Helm Crag, distinguished from its rugged neighbours not so much by its height as by the strange broken outlines of its top, like some gigantic building demolished, and the stones that composed it flung across each other in wild confusion. Just beyond it opens one of the sweetest landscapes that art ever attempted to imitate. The bosom of the mountains spreading here into a broad basin discovers in the midst Grasmere water. Its margin is hollowed into small bays with bold eminences, some of rock, some of turf, that half conceal and vary the figure of the little lake they command. From the shore, a low promontory pushes itself far into the water, and on it stands a white village with the parish church rising in the midst of it. Not a single red tile, no gentleman's flaring house or garden walls break in upon the repose of this little unsuspected paradise. But all is peace, rusticity, and happy poverty in its neatest, most becoming attire.
Gray's account directly anticipates the hordes of picturesque travellers who were to visit the lakes in the late 18th century, with its description of the rugged wildness of Helm Crag, as well as in the variety and contrast of the framed scene which hung below him. It emphasises the poet's sense of control over what he sees, placing him as an observer, framing and shaping the view. We can compare this to Wordsworth's opening for Home at Grasmere.
Once on the brow of yonder hill I stopped, while I was yet a schoolboy. Of what age I cannot well remember, but the hour I well remember, though the year be gone. And with a sudden influx overcome at sight of this seclusion, I forgot my haste, for hasty had my footsteps been, as boyish my pursuits, and sighing said, "What happy fortune were it here to live, and if I thought of dying, if a thought of mortal separation could come in with paradise before me, here to die."
Although Wordsworth, like Gray, presents the valley as a kind of paradise on earth, he begins his poem from a very different spot. He situates the reader here on the side of Lothrig Terrace, looking back towards Grasmere. Gray's route over Dunmail Raise is in the far distance. Wordsworth's sense of place is not defined by the roads and routes of the traveller, but by himself as a boy wandering the hills. His concern is with what he felt then and now, with the vital connection between past and present selves through a lived experience of place. Wordsworth does not distance himself from the landscape, he defines himself in and through it. Home at Grasmere is often overlooked by readers of Wordsworth's poetry, largely because it was unpublished in the poet's lifetime. But this is an important piece, not least as the first book of The Recluse, Wordsworth's great unwritten poem, for which the prelude was merely an introduction. But what is Home at Grasmere actually about?
Well, for me, there are two major themes in Wordsworth's poem Home at Grasmere. The first is, as the title would suggest, his discovery of an important place, a place which he can call his home. And much of the poem sets about describing and celebrating that place. But what this builds into is the second major theme, which is his sense of his discovery of his vocation as a poet.
It's a poem about a dream fulfilled. The past has been proved richly fulfilled in the present. It's a poem about the present and what is happening and the people surrounding Wordsworth and his sister. But of course it's above all a poem about the future. Where do I go from here? And these three parts of the poem, past, present and future, seem to be continually move the sense one has of Wordsworth's confidence in what he's saying and the directness with which he's saying it shifts as light and shade play in the poem. So, for just an example, I mean, Wordsworth finds himself describing this as paradise. And then immediately thinks, but not paradise in the bad sense. It's not Arcadia. I know better than that. There's just one example throughout the poem of shifts of emphasis. But as the poem comes towards its conclusion, it's as if Wordsworth suddenly becomes sure of what the poem is, something that he's been attempting to identify, a shape, suddenly becomes clear to him. And a poem that has been all kinds of things. It's been a narrative, it's been an apostrophe to Grasmere, it's been a series of little tales, suddenly becomes an elevated, lofty promise for the future on man, on nature, and on human life, and away the poem goes. And at that point, you do feel, I think, as a reader, that it's secure at last.
In 1799, the Wordsworths were travellers without a fixed home, moving from England to Germany and back again, staying with friends and in lodging houses. It's hard for us to imagine now, but the Lakes was not an automatic choice of settling place for Wordsworth, but one option amongst many. In October 1799, he and Coleridge came on a walking tour of the Lakes. They came across Dove Cottage, and William decided to rent it. In December of that year, William and Dorothy moved to Grasmere and set up home here together properly for the first time. They were to live here until 1808, and Wordsworth produced much of his most famous poetry here. The Wordsworths walked from Sockburn in Yorkshire, where they had been staying with their friends the Hutchinsons, to their new home in Westmoreland. Their journey is described in detail in Home at Grasmere.
Bleak season was it, turbulent and bleak, when hitherward we journeyed, and on foot, through bursts of sunshine and through flying snows, paced the long vales. How long they were, and yet how fast that length of way was left behind, Wensley's long vale and Sedber's naked heights. Stern was the face of nature. We rejoiced in that stern countenance, for our souls had there a feeling of their strength. The naked trees, the icy brooks, as on we passed, appeared to question us. Whence come ye? To what end? They seemed to say. What would ye, said the shower, wild wanderers, whither through my dark domain?
Both the Wordsworths and Coleridge were unusual in choosing to travel on foot. In the 18th century, normally only the poor would move about in this way, although by the end of the century, the walking tour had become a fashionable part of the picturesque experience. Walking across the north of England in the middle of December, however, is decidedly unfashionable. In the poem, Wordsworth articulates the force and hostility of nature, and this is also felt in his letter to Coleridge describing their journey.
When we had walked about 1.5 miles, we overtook 2 men with a string of ponies and some empty carts. I recommended to Dorothy to avail herself of this opportunity of husbanding her strength. We rode with them more than 2 miles. 'Twas bitter cold, the wind driving the snow behind us in the best style of a mountain storm.
So just how important is the immediate context of Wordsworth's life in 1800 for a full understanding of his poetry?
Well, I think we need to remember the nature of the decade that had preceded Wordsworth's arrival in Dove Cottage. The 1790s for Wordsworth was a tremendously exciting but also very unsettling period. He'd spent time in France, in London. He lived a fairly itinerant life really through the decade. He'd been very excited by the events of the French Revolution, but ultimately those had proved disappointing. At the same time, through the decade, he's starting to establish a greater confidence in his own abilities, and the friendship with Coleridge is crucial to this. So when we come to 1800, we have a strong sense with Wordsworth of now is the time when he can settle in this particular location and produce his masterwork.
Wordsworth makes a declaration in this poem that he and Dorothy have moved back there in order to cultivate a life of divinity and truth, he says. It's an amazing thing to say. And they believe that they will find help in the veil. Now, what if that turns out not to be true? It's a test. So in that sense, I think this moment of 1800 is enormously important. I'd like actually, and I wish I'd read a lot more of this in the biography I wrote, they are also actually going back to try to conduct an experiment in living, quite literally keeping a cow, doing the garden, living simply. Can it be done? It has its little place in that long history of British people who try to go for the commune or the self-sufficiency or some return to a finer way of life. And I think that is happening here in a small way.